There's a moment that happens in a lot of households, a moment so small it almost doesn't feel like a moment at all. It's the moment the bill arrives, not the whole bill, not the full statement, but the part that catches your eye first. The line that says minimum payment due, and right beside it, a number that feels, manageable, like a tiny weight instead of a heavy one, like something you can handle without changing your life. So you do what most people do, you pay it. You pay the minimum, and you tell yourself quietly, like you're talking to your own nerves, it's fine. I'm not behind. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. You might even feel a little proud of yourself because the truth is, minimum payments were built to make you feel responsible. They're built to make you feel like you're staying on top of things. And that's the first trap. The minimum payment is not a suggestion. It's a carefully engineered psychological hook. It's the financial equivalent of a small sip of alcohol that keeps you calm, even as the rest of your life slowly tilts. It's the feeling of relief, the feeling of control, the feeling that you are still a good, capable adult, but the minimum payment is also the beginning of a long, quiet relationship with debt, not a dramatic one, not a debt that shows up as a loud emergency. It's the kind of debt that shows up in the background, like a constant low hum in a house. You barely notice it until one day you realize you've been living inside that hum for years. Let's say you've got a credit card balance of $2,000. It's not a huge amount. It's not a story you'd tell your friends about. It's just a thing. Maybe it came from a medical bill you had to cover, or a month where you had to buy groceries and gas and you didn't get paid on time. Maybe it's a couple of months of holiday spending that you didn't think would matter. Your minimum payment might be around $50. Sometimes it's $40. Sometimes it's $60. It depends on the card, but it's always a number that feels like a small sacrifice. It's the kind of number you can pay without thinking too hard. You don't have to skip dinner. You don't have to cut off your phone. You don't have to explain anything to anyone. And because it's small, you pay it and you breathe a sigh of relief. You made the payment. You're good. You're responsible. But the truth is that $50 is doing almost nothing to the balance. It's mostly paying interest. And interest in this case is not a mysterious concept. It's a quiet tax, a fee for the privilege of borrowing. It's a fee that is designed to keep you paying for a long time. Let's imagine your card has an interest rate of 24% APR, which is not uncommon. That's the kind of rate that feels like a number you can ignore because it's abstract, because you don't see it the way you see rent or groceries. But when you break it down, it becomes a different story. That $2,000 balance is costing you about $40 a month in interest alone just to keep it alive. That means if you pay $50, only $10 of it goes toward the actual debt. The rest is the cost of borrowing. The card is basically saying, you want to use money you don't have? Fine, here's the price. And you keep paying the minimum. You keep feeling good. You keep telling yourself you're handling it. Because that's what the minimum payment does. It keeps the pain small. It keeps the shame small. It keeps the problem out of sight. But the problem isn't out of sight. It's just moving slowly. And humans are very good at ignoring slow-moving problems. This is the psychological trap. It's like you don't feel like you're drowning, you feel like you're swimming. And swimming feels like progress even when you're not getting anywhere. Now imagine the month after that. You get paid, you pay your rent, you pay your utilities, you buy groceries, you fill up your car. Yeah, you might even go out with friends because you want to feel normal. You want to feel like you're still part of life. And then you see the credit card statement again. You owe $1,990 now. The balance dropped by only $10. But you don't think about that. You think about the fact that you paid something. You think about the fact that you didn't miss a payment. You think about the fact that you're still good. So you pay the minimum again. You pay $50. You feel that same small relief. You're doing the responsible thing. You're not being reckless, but you're also still stuck because the next month, the balance is $1,980. And the month after that, it's $1,970. And the month after that, it's $1,960. The debt is going down, but at a pace so slow that your brain treats it like it's not really happening. Your brain is not wired to worry about things that change slowly. This is why the minimum payment is such a clever trap. It's not that it's a bad idea in theory. It's not that paying something is wrong. It's that the minimum payment is designed to make you feel like you're handling it while you are not. And then something happens, life happens, something unexpected, a car repair, a medical bill, a job hiccup, a shift in work hours, a family emergency, and you find yourself in a position where you can't pay the minimum. You don't like the feeling. You don't want to feel like you failed. So you do what a lot of people do. You take money from somewhere else. You move money around. You borrow from a friend. You borrow from a family member. You take out a payday loan. You use another credit card. You do anything to avoid the feeling of not being able to pay the minimum. And this is where the psychological trap tightens, because the minimum payment gives you a false sense of security. It makes you think the debt is manageable. It makes you think the debt is small. It makes you think you are in control. But when life hits, the debt doesn't hit back with you. It just keeps growing quietly. And you start to feel the pressure in other parts of your life. You start to feel it in your sleep. You start to feel it in your relationships. You start to feel it in your confidence. Yeah, the credit card is not just a financial tool. It becomes a psychological presence. It becomes something you carry with you emotionally, even when you don't think about it. You can't fully relax because you know it's there. You can't fully enjoy your paycheck because you know it has a job to do. And that's the thing about debt. It doesn't just take your money, it takes your mental space, it takes your energy, it takes your ability to imagine a future that isn't ruled by the past. Let's go deeper into one of those months. You get paid on Friday. You look at your bank account. You see the rent is due. You see the utilities. You see the car payment. You see groceries. You see gas. And then you see the credit card minimum. And the minimum payment is like a tiny voice in your head saying, you can do this. It's only $50. And you want to believe it. You want to believe you're a responsible person. You want to believe you're not the kind of person who gets overwhelmed by money. So you pay it, and then you feel good for about 24 hours because the next day you notice something. You notice you didn't have enough left over for something you wanted. Maybe it was a date night. Maybe it was a small purchase that would have made your week feel better. Maybe it was a new pair of shoes. Maybe it was just a sense of having a little bit of freedom. And you start to feel the squeeze, but you tell yourself you're doing fine. You tell yourself this is just a phase. You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself you'll catch up. And the truth is you might catch up, but catching up is not the same thing as getting free. Catching up is just bringing yourself back to the point where the minimum payment is still a burden, because the minimum payment never goes away. Yeah, no, it's always there. It's like a monthly rent payment for a place you don't even live in. You're paying to borrow money that you already spent. You're paying to keep the ability to borrow more. And you start to notice something else. You start to notice the minimum payment is slowly changing. Not dramatically, but slowly. Maybe it goes up because your balance is going up. Maybe you used the card again because something unexpected happened. Maybe you used it because you wanted to feel normal. Maybe you used it because you wanted to avoid the feeling of missing out. And then the minimum payment becomes $60 or $70 or $80. And now you have a new reality. You have a new normal. A normal where your paycheck has to cover more than used to, a normal where your spending has to shrink in other places, a normal where you start to resent your own life a little bit. This is a psychological trap again. The trap is not that the debt exists. The trap is that your brain adjusts to the debt. Your brain makes it feel normal. And once something feels normal, it becomes hard to see it as a problem. You start to tell yourself stories like, this is just how it is, or this is just the cost of living, or everyone has debt, or, I'm not the only one. And those stories are not wrong. They're just not the full story. Because the full story is that the minimum payment is a mechanism that keeps you in a state of perpetual repayment. It keeps you from ever getting ahead. It keeps you from ever feeling truly free. And the worst part is it does it while making you feel like you are doing the right thing. Let's take another scene. It's a Sunday evening. You're at the grocery store. You're buying food for the week. You're trying to be smart. You're buying what you need, not what you want. You're looking at prices. You're doing the mental math. You have a list. You have a budget. You have a plan. But then you see something you didn't plan for, a sale, right? A special buy one, get one. Something that makes your brain say, this is a good deal, and your brain is not wrong. It is a good deal. It's just not a good deal for your situation. You put it in your cart. You don't even realize you're doing it. You just feel the pull of something that feels like a win. You feel like you're being smart. You feel like you're saving money, and you pay for your groceries. You leave the store. You go home. You feel a small sense of accomplishment, and then you open your credit card statement because you used the card for groceries. You used it because you didn't want to use your debit card. You used it because you didn't want to feel like you were running out of money. You used it because the card is always there, like a safety net, and you see that the balance went up, and you feel a tiny sting of guilt, but you tell yourself, it's okay, I'll pay it off, and you pay the minimum, because the minimum is always the first option. The minimum is always the default. The minimum is the thing you can do without changing your life. This is how the trap grows, not with one big decision, not with one reckless moment, but with small decisions that feel normal. Small decisions that feel like life, small decisions that feel like you're being a responsible adult. And the thing about small decisions is they add up. Now, let's talk about the psychology behind it, because the minimum payment is not just a financial number, it's a psychological tool. It plays on a part of human nature that is very strong, the desire to avoid pain. Pain is not just physical, pain is emotional. Pain is shame, yet pain is the feeling of failing. Pain is the feeling of not being able to handle your own life. Pain is the feeling of being judged. So when the minimum payment exists, it gives you a way to avoid pain. It gives you a way to avoid the worst part of debt, which is the feeling of being out of control. If you pay the minimum, you avoid the feeling of being behind. You avoid the feeling of being irresponsible. You avoid the feeling of being a failure. You avoid the feeling of having to face the full truth of your situation. And that avoidance becomes a habit because humans are habit machines. We repeat what makes us feel better. We repeat what keeps us calm. We repeat what keeps us safe. So the minimum payment becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a part of your identity. You become the person who pays the minimum. You become the person who handles debt. You become the person who is fine. And that identity is powerful. It makes it harder to see the truth. It makes it harder to question the story you're telling yourself. It makes it harder to imagine a different life, because a different life would require admitting that the current life is not working. And admitting that is uncomfortable. Now, let's go back to the timeline. You've been paying the minimum for a while. The balance is still there. The balance is still a part of your life. The balance is still the weight. But you've grown used to it. And then one day, you look at your bank account and you realize something. You realize that the minimum payment is taking up a larger share of your paycheck than it used to. You realize that it's not just $50 anymore. It's $100 or $150 or $200. And suddenly you start to feel the squeeze in a new way. Not just emotionally, but practically. You start to feel it in your ability to pay rent. You start to feel it in your ability to save. You start to feel it in your ability to do anything besides just keep the minimum going. And you start to resent the card. You start to resent the company. You start to resent the system. You start to resent yourself. But the resentment doesn't change anything. The resentment is just another emotion you have to carry. So you keep paying. You keep paying the minimum. You keep doing the thing that keeps you feeling like a responsible person, even though you're not getting ahead. Now imagine a month where something happens that forces you to use the card again. A car repair, a medical bill, a work expense, a family emergency, a rent increase. You use the card, the balance goes up, the minimum payment goes up, your life gets tighter, and you don't even notice how tight it's getting. You just keep living. You just keep paying the minimum. You just keep telling yourself you're fine. And then one day you get a call from the card company. Maybe it's a late fee. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's a notice. Maybe it's a message that says your account is now at risk. And you feel a cold feeling in your stomach. You feel like you've been caught. You feel like you've been discovered. You feel like the system has finally noticed you, but the system noticed you a long time ago. You just didn't notice the system noticing you, because the trap is designed to be invisible. It's designed to feel like normal life. It's designed to feel like being a responsible adult. And that's the cruel part, because you are a responsible adult. You are paying, you are showing up. You are doing the thing you're supposed to do. You're being the kind of person who pays the minimum, but the system is not rewarding that. The system is just keeping you in place. Now let's talk about what happens when the minimum payment becomes a bigger portion of your life, when it starts to shape your choices. Maybe you stop going out. Maybe you stop buying things you want. Maybe you stop planning trips. Maybe you stop thinking about the future. Maybe you stop imagining what life could be like if you weren't carrying this weight. And you start to feel like you're living in a smaller version of your own life. You start to feel like you're living in a life with less room. And you might start to blame yourself. You might start to feel like you made bad choices. You might start to feel like you're not good with money. You might start to feel like you're failing. And that's the second trap. The trap of shame. because the minimum payment keeps you paying, but it also keeps you feeling like you're the problem. And when you feel like you're the problem, you don't feel like you can ask for help. You don't feel like you can talk to someone. You don't feel like you can be honest about it. So you keep it to yourself. You keep paying, you keep living, you keep shrinking your life. And then something else happens. You start to see credit cards as a normal part of life. You start to see them as a tool everyone uses. You start to see debt as a normal part of being an adult. And that is the trap's final form. The trap becomes your worldview, because once you accept the idea that debt is normal, you stop seeing it as a problem. You stop seeing it as something that needs to be addressed. You stop seeing it as something that is holding you back. You just accept it, like a bill you pay every month, like a tax you didn't vote for, like a constant part of life. And that acceptance is the trap. Because once you accept it, the minimum payment becomes a permanent part of your life. Let's go deeper into the psychology of why the minimum payment feels so comfortable. Is because the minimum payment allows you to delay the full reality of your situation. It allows you to avoid the big emotional work of facing your financial life. The minimum payment gives you a tiny window of relief every month. Like it gives you a moment where you can feel like you're doing okay. It gives you a moment where you can say, I'm not failing, I'm not drowning. And that moment is addictive, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet way. The moment becomes a habit. The moment becomes a ritual. The moment becomes a way of soothing yourself. And DR, you don't even realize you're soothing yourself. You just think you're being responsible. You just think you're paying your bills. You just think you're living your life. But the truth is, you're being soothed into a long-term situation. Now, let's go to a scene that happens to a lot of people. It's the day the minimum payment goes up. You get your statement. You look at the minimum payment. You see that it's higher, and you feel a small spike of anxiety. You feel the kind of anxiety that you don't want to admit you feel. The kind of anxiety that you try to ignore. The kind of anxiety you tell yourself you don't have. You tell yourself, it's fine, I'll adjust. I'll cut something, I'll figure it out. But the truth is, you don't cut anything. You don't adjust. You just keep paying, because you're already living on a tightrope. You're already doing everything you can. And that's the cruel reality. The minimum payment doesn't just trap you financially, it traps you emotionally. It traps you in a constant state of doing the best you can with the resources you have, even when those resources are not enough. And you start to feel like your life is a series of best you cans. You start to feel like you're always just barely holding on. You start to feel like you're always one emergency away from falling. And that feeling becomes a normal part of your life. It becomes your baseline. And then you start to understand something. You start to understand that the minimum payment is not just a number. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of living where you're always paying for the past. Because that's what credit cards are. They are a way of spending money you don't have now, with the promise that you'll pay for it later. And the minimum payment is the promise that you'll pay for it very slowly. It's like buying a ticket to a movie you don't want to see and then paying for it every month for years. Yeah, you don't even get the enjoyment of the movie anymore. You just get the payment. And that's where the psychological trap is strongest, because the minimum payment turns debt into a kind of background noise. It turns debt into something you accept as normal. It turns debt into something you stop fighting. And when you stop fighting, you start losing. Now, let's imagine the next stage. The next stage is when the minimum payment starts to affect your decisions in bigger ways, not just groceries, not just small purchases,